Great stuff. You pick this up at Lowe's for like $3 a can. I cut this tube here off to about 2 inches long. That way whenever I spray it, I spin it off and just let the foam cure inside the tube and this piece here. You're just going to separate them. Then you can take a piece of wire and push it out, and there's a good chance that you can use the foam again. I can get about 4 airplanes out of a can of foam. Whenever you spray the foam, you want to spray it up at the leading edge. And the reason you want to do that is because if you don't get enough in there, it's going to expand from the leading edge and come back. If you spray it in the middle or at the back, up against the spar, then it may not expand forward. It's better to have it expand from the front back. Okay, here I want to cover another important tip, and that is on the mounting of the servos. What I'm actually doing here is cutting back the tape 1/4 inch ahead of the holes and 1/4 inch behind the holes, and then I'm going to cut from hole to hole because this is where the servo is going to go, and I want to be sure that I remove the tape so that whenever I install the servo gets glued to the foam and not just to the tape. These are the pieces. You have a left and a right half. The slots, all of the notches are on the inside. So this is going to be one half, this is going to be the other. And again, the notches are on the inside. The first step to building the wing is actually to tape off the wing, and I'm going to do this on one to show you. Here I'm taping off the wing. This is the first step, first piece right down the center, and then move the wing over so that you can place the tape from the trailing edge forward. You can see here the third piece is going down, the fourth piece, and the fifth piece. Now we're going to rotate the wing and start again with the first piece, the second piece, again just 1/8 of an inch lap, the third piece, the fourth piece, and the fifth piece. And then at this point we'll turn the wing over and start trimming using a razor. Trim it right to the edge of the foam, and you're going to trim this all the way around. Now whenever you get to the radius part, you're going to turn the foam over and work from the top side and use a sharp X-Acto blade, and you can run around that radius with no problem. The step is going to be to remove the film from the surfaces. So what you can do is use some tape to do this. I'm not going to do it all, but I am going to do enough to show you so you understand how to do it the way I do it. You're just going to take some masking tape and put on the side that has the film. And if we do this, we're actually going to be pulling this film loose, and then it will peel off. So just like that. And then we'll take another piece of tape and put on here and peel the rest of it off. But you want to make sure you get all of the film off, because the film does not stick here very well. Now I have the film all removed from this piece. I'll set it aside, on, and it may start coming off in pieces, and if it does, that's okay. You just have to spend the time to go ahead and remove it. Some of it may be real easy to get off, and some of it may, like I say, you may have to spend a little time. But as you can see here, I've cleaned this piece and one of the tips, so you got to do the other. You got to do this piece and the other control surface, and go ahead and remove also the film on the support. Here's how you get this initial bend, and this is probably the most important step. Is you want to start this fold by bringing up the foam up to till it meets here, and then you're going to fold it over. But we're not going to put any pressure back here or back here. We're just going to bring this over like this and leave this fat. Bring it and line it up, and I'm going to use my body a little bit to ensure that this gets lined up, and bring that tape over. And here, same thing, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. And the idea is that if you get this right, then whenever you push it down on the leading edge, it will continue to be correct, and it'll put memory in this seam here, so whenever you fold it back over, it'll go in the same place. But at this point, I'm going to be pressing down on this leading edge, and I'm putting a lot of pressure. Don't be afraid to put pressure on it. And then I'm going to check it, and if you have a little bit of buildup right here, you will, because of the two folds coming together. We're just going to trim that off. Now you can sand it, or you can trim it with an X-Acto blade. That's what I took off of there, and that gets my edge, leaves my edge straight again. You can also check the other edges. If for some reason it's off, you're welcome to trim it. Okay, you can actually take the tape off after you've exercised this really well and it's flat. Then you can tape it together on the ends, or if you need to trim the end, go ahead and trim it and then tape it together on both ends and then trim down the edge. Also this edge here, if you get that off, it's not the end of the world. Just hold it flat. Actually cut the long side back to match the short side. Not a big deal. Same thing on the back. If you're back, you can see this one here is right on, but if I work with this a little bit, you can see there I was able to pull it back. If that's how you wound up with it being flat, then you could trim this back. But at any rate, if I mash this flat, you can see that it actually comes out there really nice. Now we're going to look for the top side. This is key. We're going to be building with the top side down. So the top side is the side with the holes in it. So we're going to put that down, and we're going to have the bottom up. So now I'm going to open this up, and I want to tape this together. So I'm just going to line this up and put a piece of tape on it. Now the tape is actually going to keep my epoxy from getting all over on the bottom. Now I'm going to fold this over and run a bead of epoxy. The most common mistake guys make is they mix it back here. You want to mix your pool of epoxy up here because you want it to be coming out that direction. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it so that my epoxy is right in here. I'm not going to mash it down there. I'm going to mash it ahead of it and create a funnel or a tip. And now if I fold this over again, if I mash from here forward, I'm going to be mashing the epoxy out. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this down so I can actually put a very controlled amount of epoxy on this seam. I'm just exercising this, making sure that I spread the epoxy on the seam. And once I'm satisfied that I have that, then I'm just going to set it up here, and actually the weight itself is going to hold this in place. I just want to make sure there's no buildup or anything because I want to lay this flat. Remove my tape I had on here previous. This is the masking tape, and that actually ensured that the glue stayed in the joint. I'm going to be placing it right up against the spar location. So what I can do is set my spar in, and here's a little trick about the spars. This material varies in thickness, so as a rule you take and you pinch the notches. This just ensures that the tab will go down into the pocket. And I'm going to set the spar down in the pocket here. And now if I set that in there, then I'm able to attach the brace. And now I'm going to go ahead and glue this in place. And again, this is 5 minutes. And I know about where it's got to go, so I'm just going to put it in, and I'm going to watch my notches for the spar. And I'm not going to impede those because I do not want to have a problem with my notches or the spar going where it needs to go. Now to keep it from moving around, I'm going to put some tape on it because it will want to move around a little bit. But if we tape it, then we can put pressure on it and it won't go anywhere. You can remove any excess that you have, because we don't want to impede the spar. Now you can see I have the reinforcement glued in place. And again, I'm not impeding the spar on either side, so the spar will go right next to that. Now we're ready to move on to the next step. We're going to start by filling the leading edge with a bead of epoxy. So now I'm going to start filling some of the pockets here. One good thing about the pastry bag is it allows you a lot of control over how much and where you put the epoxy. And at this point I'm just putting it in the holes. That way it has time to level out in there. And now I'm going to start running a bead from hole to hole. And the spar will set right down on top of this. And then we're going to go ahead and put a little bead on the edges here. I'm also putting a little bead over the marks that I have on here. That's where the small spacer goes. These pieces here. Now I'm just going to make sure I have epoxy on every place that I need it. And it looks like I do. Now we're going to put the foam in. Now keep in mind it's going to be cut out up here, but I want to make sure that I have enough to fill the void on either side here. So my hope is that will do it. So now I need to start taping this together. So I'm going to put out some tape. I'm going to put the spar in on both sides, and then we're going to fold it over. We're going to line up the edge here. We're going to wrap the tape around it. We're going to do this on both sides. Again, the tape has become the clamp. There's that one. We're going to do this one. but it's also important that you get it right. So not only am I working quick, but I'm also making sure that I line the pieces up. Now we're going to check and make sure that our spar is in the slots. And then we're going to tape it together here. Real critical that we make this joint right here very tight. Very important. Now we want to make sure that all the pieces are in the correct way. Now the other thing is we want to make sure the trailing edge is approximately the same all the way across, and it looks like it is. So now we will let that sit. We make sure that we're down here. This piece has got good contact, and so does that one. Here I'm cutting open the battery hatch, and I'm doing this from hole to hole, vertically and horizontally. And I'm going to also be removing the foam in the area here. Now I have opened up the battery hatch. You can see that I have not glued the bottom, and I'm able to open that up so that I can glue it. So that's going to be the next step, is to go ahead and glue the bottom seam together. I'm actually going to start by raising up a lip and just inserting the epoxy right on the edge, just a little bead right on the edge there. And actually I put a little more weight over there, and it will even open up more. So now I'm going to put some on the other side, and just want to make sure that I cover both edges. I'm not worried too much about getting any epoxy on the tape, because again, it will not stick to it. And whenever I tape it together, I'm going to be pulling it so that I close up that seam. I'm going to use some long pieces of tape because I do want this seam to be tight. So here I'm going to start on this side in the middle, push the tape down, and now I'm lifting and pulling the panel together, and you can see that I've actually mashed a lot of the epoxy out. Again, this is why you use the long tape, because you do want to pull it tight, because I want this seam to be tight. So now as soon as this cures, then I'll clean this up, and we'll start installing the firewall. Flake it off, and you want to really be careful, because like I say, the epoxy does not stick to the tape very well at all. So that's why we don't glue to it. So now with all the epoxy removed, I'm going to tape it off. Just like that. I'm going to roll the tape around on the front here, over to the top. Mash it down really well. And I'm going to trim the tape back to the edge. Just like that. So now the bottom has been glued and taped, and now I can remove any of the glue that's on the inside here, because this is where the Velcro is going to go for the battery. Okay, the next step is going to be to install the firewall, and we're going to do this one piece at a time. And I'm going to start by installing the first piece on the bottom. Okay, here's a look at the firewall that's been installed. And now I'm going to go ahead and finish up the last few things that need to be taped, which in this case is the control surface. And I'm taping from the bevel back on the control surface on both sides. So you can see here's the bevel, and I've taped on that side. Now I'm going to tape this side from the bevel back, but before I tape it, I'm going to trim off the tape right with the edge. And do the other side, going from the bevel back. Again, I'm going to trim it. And now I'll use Blendrum tape to mount the control surface. And the way you mount the control surface, I'm not going to tape this one right now, but I do need to tape that one off. But in order to mount this, you bring it about a 1/16 of an inch from the edge here back, and it gets taped in place. The narrow side goes up near the center, the wide side at the tip. And finally, the last step is going to be to glue on the wingtip. I'm not going to glue it on, but I am going to show you how I put them on. First thing I do is I don't use the full width. I cut it in half. I take the half and I set my wing down with the trailing edge flat on the table, and then I mount the winglet or the wingtip so that the front is just slightly ahead of the leading edge here, much like this one here has been cut. Here's a few tips for you to ensure that you build a straight wing. First off, it all goes back to making that initial fold. Whenever you fold the wing over and you mash it flat, take a look at all the edges. If you have an edge that did not match or is long, just cut it off so that it matches the shorter side. And it doesn't matter where it's at, it doesn't matter how much it is, just make sure that whenever you fold it down and you hold it down flat, that all the edges match on each wing half. Then whenever you glue it together, you're just going to pull the two edges so that they match and then tape it off like I've done here. And by doing that, you're going to build a straight wing. The other thing about the wing itself is using 30-minute epoxy. Use 30-minute epoxy because it does give you some working time. Also, in the build that I've just completed, this brace that goes under here, which is a piece just like this one, I actually had initially put it in backwards. I put it in like that, and that's wrong. The taper goes, the high side of the taper goes toward the center, and the tapered end goes toward the wingtip. I believe the 30-minute epoxy gives you time to make adjustments and tweak the tape so that whenever you get done, the edge, the corner here, should be the same height as it is over here, and same thing, this point here should be about the same as this one here. And if you do that initial bend and you do it correctly, and if not, just go ahead and trim it down, it will be fine and you will build a straight wing. One last thing is the CG. You're going to mark the CG from the point back 8 7/8 is where it's at. What I do is put a mark at 9 and at 8 3/4, and then I draw a line across in front of the trailing edge here, and then take the fixture, which is nothing more than a couple of pencils on a block of wood, and I set the wing on. Now this is after I've installed the servos, the radio, the speed controller, the motor, the prop, everything, get it ready to go. Then when I set it up here, I move the battery back and forth in that slot until it balances with the pencils between those two lines, the 8 3/4 and 9-inch marks. Once you've done that, then you've achieved balance. Put a mark on the wing so that you know where that battery needs to go in order for the wing to be balanced. The controls, 5/16 up and 5/16 down seems to be real good control. If you're going to fly the stock version, then you might want to give yourself a little more throw, but if you're flying the micro Dan motor setup, 5/16 is plenty.